too, so it fits easier for you.
want to say something on yours?
Sure. Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3.
Everybody's good. Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the session here in Paint Branch. The Goldman Act, effective tool to obtain and return of internationally abducted American children, or toothless paper tiger. This afternoon we welcome Jamel Zumal, who is presenting here this afternoon. There are currently no existing practical avenues for redress in obtaining compliance from rogue countries who systematically refuse to return internationally abducted children to the United States. The one tool that has been designed by Congress to put some teeth into the government's efforts to bring U.S. citizen children back has been only superficially successful. While the Goldman Act provides for the imposition of sanctions of increasing severity on states that systematically refuse to return children, the actual implementation of the act has not resulted in the imposition of sanctions so far. This session will attempt to answer 4 questions based on the last issued State Department annual compliance report. And at this time, I introduce again Jamil Zamu, father of an abducted daughter, and her name is Maya. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, I'm very happy and humbled to be here today and to be talking with fellow parents, people who are interested in this issue. It's obviously an issue that's very dear to me because of my own personal situation and the kidnapping of my little girl 4 years ago. But I'm not alone. There's a lot of people in the same situation. And the issue, is that parental abduction is becoming an epidemic. The world is becoming globalized, more connected in more ways, and until the pandemic occurred with coronavirus, people used to travel quite a bit so that it would be increasingly, the occurrence of these, parental kidnappings has become almost something that's commonplace, unfortunately. What has not become commonplace is the ability to get redress and to get children returned once they have been abducted to a different country. We have a perfectly good system in the United States for domestic abductions. Where the system breaks down is where it comes to internationally abducted children. And so in this little presentation, what I wanted to do is basically go over 4 questions with our group and, at the end of the session, come up with some very practical recommendations that we could make to improve the enforcement of the Goldman Act and to make it more likely that our children would come home. One of the things that I'm yearning for the most is the return of my little girl, and I'm sure there's parents who want to have their little daughters returned to them as well, and the sooner the better. So what I propose to do is, we go through the presentation and, ask those 4 questions that I was talking about in the hope that we will come up with some good thoughts and good answers to these considerations. So now we need to actually pull up this thing here, and hopefully, it'll do it without too much grief. For some reason, it's not recognizing the USB port, but has there ever been a presentation where you didn't have a glitch? So, it seems like, we're having our glitch at the beginning. I think this means, the rest of the presentation will be great. Let's see now. Come on. For some reason, can somebody give us a little bit of help here? And it's should we just restart it, maybe?
We can force it to restart.
Okay. So, as a bonus, we're all going to become experts on Windows. So, well, maybe I can do a little. Well, while this thing reboots, maybe we can talk about the 4 questions, and then when they come up, we'll go over the presentation. So the first question is that, the Goldman Act was really established because there was so little success in returning children that Congress felt that the State Department would be the best place that could bring relief to parents that had seen their children being abducted to foreign countries. And so by creating the act, it created a framework that would permit the US government to essentially address the failure of governments, international foreign governments, to return American states. And this was in recognition of the fact that, some governments were actually notorious. Oops, are we? So some foreign governments were notorious in not returning children, and this epidemic had spread to many countries around the world, each one justifying the failure to return children on the basis of something or other. Very often, irrelevant consideration from the standpoint of, a child needs to have 2 parents, and 2 parents should be able to get their children back. If you go to Russia, they come up with a number of excuses for failing to return children. If you go to Greece, yesterday I was having a conversation with a young man whose child was being retained in Greece, and the answers, they don't really make a whole lot of sense. even though the Hague Convention does apply. For those of you who don't know what the Hague Convention, it's a special, treaty between countries who, once they become partners, agree to facilitate the return of children, and they agree that because this is such a crime now of really very wide proportions, that they're not going to take jurisdiction. They're going to do the right thing, and once a child has been, identified as having been improperly retained or sent to a country, they're going to basically just recognize, the abduction and then order the return of the child. And they're not supposed to wait. They're supposed to act very quickly, typically less than a couple of months. But I think under the Hague Convention, the aim is to be, returning children within days, within a few weeks, 2 weeks. Fortunately, that's the theory. The practice is very, very different. So now that there's an agreement between countries to return children, the US agreed to do this, and actually we do it. These, oh, there we are. I think we're getting lucky now. We're going to have a real presentation. I'm so excited. Goody. So, all these countries, they come up with all kinds of excuses. And the first question we're going to look at is, who are the worst offenders? Who are the countries who are actually, systematically refusing to return children? Is this a trend? Is the number of countries who do this, increasing? And there we go, the Goldman Act. So I'm very sorry that it didn't work the first time. I don't know what's wrong with my laptop, or hopefully it'll do it very quickly now. So who are those countries? And, obviously the data is empirical. There's no real, consensus. The State Department does compile some information, and they've been compiling that information since the passage of the Act in 2014. So we've had, technically five annual reports and 5 action reports coming out of the State Department, providing an indication. So come on. I think I'm going to send a letter to Mr. Dell. So technically we have had a track record, and it seems like some countries are habitual offenders, but the enforcement is very, very disparate. And my own assessment is that the number of countries who offend is increasing, not decreasing. And you can see that if you look at the action reports and if you look at the annual reports on compliance. So if we can just, come on, you can do it. Yes. I'm doing a silent prayer right now. What's going on? So, bottom line, to the first question of, who are the countries who are doing this, the point of this question is to name names. And unfortunately, some countries that we would not think of, oh, there we go. Perfect. So we were talking about the Goldman Act and how it works. So it basically gives the State Department tools to pressure foreign governments to do the right thing and return children. Very often it's on the basis of, the Hague Convention. The way the Hague Convention works is that for the US to be able to make a request to a country where a child has been abducted, there need to be bilateral relations, what they call, both countries have to recognize each other as treaty partners. So let's take, a case where, France and the United States are, both members of the Hague Convention on the return of parentally abducted children, and they're also treaty partners. So technically, if a child were abducted to France from the United States, so, the treaty works on where does the abduction, start and where does it finish. So those are the two countries, who then become involved in, resolving the dispute about where the child should be. So France is a treaty partner with the US. So that means that if you're a parent whose child was taken to France from the United States, your procedure is actually pretty simple. You go to the State Department, you file a request, and the State Department will take that request to the central authority in France, which is the Ministry of Justice, and they will, then have the obligation to locate your child. There will be a very quick, court hearing in France, and the French courts are not supposed to take jurisdiction beyond the recognition of the abduction. And then once the abduction has been recognized, their duty under the treaty is to effect the return very quickly. And there's very, very good policy reasons for this. We don't want people to feel that they can go somewhere where they will get better treatment, forum shopping essentially, take a child there and, be beyond the reach of the law, essentially have a government give them cover for what is a kidnapping. So once, this happens, the Hague Convention works, and if it does not, work, the way you get redress is under the Goldman Act. The Goldman Act gives the State Department, the ability to tell the French or whoever it may be, that happens to be the country where the child is being retained, you have a child that was taken from the US. You need to return him. So if the French government says, well, we understand we have a treaty obligation, but we're not going to, do what we're supposed to do, the State Department, has several tools under the Goldman Act. That's how the system works in general. And under the Goldman Act, then they have the ability to start demanding the return, and if the return does not occur, then they have the ability to go for additional sanctions. So they, the tools to pressure are the sanctions, and we as the people, we trust the State Department to do their work, and that's why the Act requires the State Department to provide reporting. So they publish these, two main reports every year in which they tell us, these are the countries who are doing okay, these are the countries who are not doing okay in terms of their obligations to return children. And in the action report, they're supposed to tell us these are the sanctions we have imposed on countries who are not playing by the rules. So that takes us to the first question, which is which states? Let's name names. So Germany, for example, Sweden, Norway, you wouldn't think of those countries as being offenders, but they are. They do not return children. There seems to be, and it's kind of like, how do you quantify racism? It's a very difficult, concept. So how do you approach the question of whether a court in Norway or Sweden or Germany is going, is acting, is doing things for a reason which they're not disclosing? And the truth is, we don't really know because, they can invoke pretextual reasons. They might not listen to the other parent. They might, decide that something that was not established in court is actually a fact when it's not. And so, the system seems to break down, in those places. And a lot of, these, problems arise from a sense of nationalism, a sense of, sometimes, it's sexism. It's, the child should be with the mother, not with the father, so we're going to, find reasons to not comply. Greece apparently is one of those situations. Russia, my experience with Russia is that they're not even trying to look fair. They're not even making the attempt. They're inventing reasons left and right. And I am personally aware of one situation involving Russia where a mother of a little girl was trying to obtain the return of her daughter who was taken to Russia and retained by her grandparents. So this woman's parents decided that they were going to grab the child, they wanted the child, and they didn't care that it was their own daughter, so their own daughter that they were harming. And so when this lady went to Russia to get her child, she found that everything had already been set up by her own parents to keep their granddaughter, her daughter. She ended up spending 10 days in prison They refused to return her daughter. They threw her in prison for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they took her from the prison to the airport with instructions never to come back. And one of the reasons they gave her is she was a traitor to Russia because she had emigrated to the US, and Russia felt it was Russia's patriotic duty to keep a young American girl, 6 years old, and not give her back to her mother, even though on paper Russia claims to respect the sanctity of the family, the right of parents to have, to raise their kids, and the right of children to be raised by their own parents. But when they don't like the rules, they just flaunt them. So the bad ones, the point I'm trying to make for this question is, you have to look beyond what what your own biases may be. I know what my own biases are. We all have them, and I think it's important to acknowledge them. The offenders are everywhere, and they're not, the ones that you would think that they might be. They're in Northern Europe, they're in Africa, they're in Asia, they're in, Eastern Asia, they're in, Russia. The problem is much wider and much deeper than people acknowledge. And so there's a lot of countries that seem to violate, this notion that a child should be returned to, their custodial parent if they're taken to a foreign country. And, don't think that because a child was taken to Switzerland, they're likely to be returned. We don't know. And these treatises, they're there, they're on paper, but the reality is that, it's not a simple task. So it's very important, these tools that we have, it's very important that they work. The next question is, what are the tools? And we just, we started talking about them. The Goldman Act is one of those tools. And the Goldman Act, in addition to requiring reporting, also has a list of increasing sanctions. And I put the list in here because I think it's an important list. And the reason it's important, you'll see, is because even though there is some things in it which actually can act as pressure points with governments who don't want to do the right thing, most of these things are really toothless. So let's talk about them. The first one is a démarche. And a démarche, if you know what it means in diplomatic language, it's a stern letter. It's letter from our government to the foreign government saying you're bad. Now they know they're bad, so how many people here think that that's going to have much impact? Probably not a whole lot. So the reality is that our State Department has issued these démarches, and does anybody want to venture a guess as to how many of those have resulted in the return of kids? 0. Yeah, not a lot. The next increasing, degree of sanctioning is an official public statement detailing the unresolved cases. That's not used very often. Actually, I'm not aware of a single time when they have used it. Does that surprise anybody? Does that get anybody upset? It got me very upset because I just gave you the situation of this lady whose daughter was kidnapped by her own parents. It's not detailed anywhere in the literature that the State Department puts out. So her situation is basically under the radar. So the onus is on her to make her case known, and the State Department does not talk about it. So they talk in global numbers, in statistics, but they don't identify these very heart-wrenching, very real human tragedies, these very real situation involving kids. This is a kid who grew up in the US, who's used to going to school in the US, and who woke up one day in a different country and told that she was never going to go back home. Doesn't that get people, a little bit mad? So official public statements almost never used. I'm not aware of any time when it was used. I could be wrong, but I doubt that there is one. A public condemnation. Again, I'd love for somebody to tell me what the difference is between a public condemnation and a démarche. Demarche is a letter, I guess, government to government. It's kind of secret, it's, hey, shape up kind of letter. And this one is, okay, we're making that public, okay. Well, it is already public in many of these cases because these cases have gone through the court system. What's not public, I guess, is our government acknowledging it, but I think they are acknowledging it. They're just not saying it publicly. But anyway, public condemnation I haven't seen, even in the case of Russia or Greece or, other countries. And then the next one is a delay or a cancellation of one or more bilateral, working, official, or state visits. That has not happened. Never. As far as I know, the State Department has never canceled a visit because, somebody's child was being held in a different country. As far as I know. So maybe they've threatened it, but certainly have not made that part of the official record of what they were planning to do. Again, I mean, the record is, they have these tools. They're not very... 15 minutes, okay. So they have these tools, but they're not really using them. Let's just go to the next one. So the withdrawal, the limitation, or the suspension of U.S. development assistance. Honestly, if the country is Germany, I don't think they're waiting for our assistance. I think, they don't care about the money we might be giving them. They might care about whether we accept, into this country some of the goods they produce. So, assistance is not something that's that's likely to produce results. Then you have the withdrawal, the limitation, or the suspension of U.S. security assistance. This might make a difference for countries like Ukraine. It might make a difference for countries like, Belarus, where, there is a threat and U.S. security, assistance makes a difference to them. But has this been threatened? I don't know, and I don't think so. Next one is the withdrawal, the limitation, or the suspension of foreign assistance to the central government for economic support. Again, I've never heard of this ever occurring. And the last one is a formal request to the foreign country concerned to extradite an individual who's engaged in abduction and who has been formally accused or charged or convicted of an extraditable offense. So this actually does happen, but most countries don't extradite the parents who have abducted children to within their territory. They just don't. Russia, they laugh at these things. Greece probably does as well, even though there's a multitude of agreements, for mutual legal assistance. This stuff, does happen. I don't know if it happens under the Goldman Act. I know that for fact, the Department of Justice in the US has made requests for extradition. But, it seems like we're always put in the situation where we have to wait until somebody leaves the country where they are habitually residing to travel to another country which doesn't have a dog in the race and who would be willing to return or extradite the person. So if somebody's living in Russia, we have to wait until they travel to France, and then, France will return them, but France will not return its own citizens. So, we have to wait until the French person goes to Russia, and then we can ask Russia to extradite, and maybe they will. So we're playing, these shell games, to try to get, people to do the right thing. And as far as I can tell, the Goldman Act has not been the source of sanctions for which, this was done. The extradition requests, they're done through the Department of Justice, not the State Department. And I believe there must be some sort of coordination between the two. But, I've started looking at this very carefully after the abduction of my own daughter. And my own assessment is that, everyone has very defined spheres within which they operate. So the State Department, their job is to be nice to other governments. But the Department of Justice is to get justice for victims. So the State Department feels like, well, if you ask for extradition, you're not being nice, you're not being a diplomat. Let somebody else do that. And so that's going to guide us in the next, question, which is, what's the actual current status regarding the implementation? So we've just gone through, a discussion of, the status of it. What I thought of doing, and I'm happy to do that if you want to, but I understand we have only 15 minutes. to look at one of the action reports. If people are interested in looking at them, I'm happy to project them.
Sorry to interrupt. We have only 10 minutes, so let's keep the last 5 minutes for the questions.
Okay, that's fine. So maybe we can look at them during this, the questions if you're interested. But the bottom line, and this is something that you'll see when we pull up the reports look like copy-pastes from one year to the next. So basically, there's not a whole lot of thought that goes into them. It seems like, these are really statistical efforts. They're trying to get the numbers, and, this year so many people were, kidnapped, and, there seems to be some accounting, I guess, gaming a little bit. So many people were returned or resolved. So then there's questions about what it means to have a case resolved versus a child returned. My own view is, a case is not resolved if a child is not returned, but for the State Department, that's not so. A case may be resolved even though the child is not returned because the child has reached 18 years old, for example, or because one of, the searching parents stops searching. So that's resolved. So, and I even had a call actually at one point from someone in the State Department who was arguing with me as the parent searching for my daughter that my case was resolved because I had gotten a custody order in the US. And I'm like, yeah, it's a piece of paper. It's a very nice piece of paper, but my daughter's not here. So how can you claim that, I go in the column of, resolved? I certainly don't feel that way. So that takes us to, these reports. We'll look at them later if you guys are interested. And then, what needs to happen to make the Goldman Act the effective tool that it was meant to be. Well, my own, I'd like to open that for discussion, but my own feeling is the Goldman Act is a very worthy effort. And I think, just the recognition that there is a problem is worth a lot. Because for a long time, we were silent, we were transparent, people didn't see us, didn't understand that we had this issue, and that, we are suffering every day. I could not put away my daughter's crib for 2 years. I just couldn't. Because I kept hoping, I kept praying, she's going to be here tomorrow, next month, next year. It's a real human tragedy. There's no other way to call it. And so, to make the Goldman Act effective, my own personal view is we should recognize that the State Department is also very well-meaning. They're professional people there. They're good people. They want the right thing. But their job is to be diplomats. Their job is not to antagonize foreign countries. Their job is to find compromise, to work with the other countries. There are issues which have left the realm of normalcy. These are not normal situations. And so when you're dealing with situations which are not normal, my view is the sanctions should be determined by a part of the US government that's in the business of punishing. So maybe it should be the State Department that comes back later after the Department of the Treasury, who's in the business of imposing sanctions, or the Department of Justice, who is in the business of getting people to do the right thing. And then they can tell us why sanctions should not apply. But I believe that's the way, it should be. And I also believe parents should be involved in discussions between the State Department and foreign governments. So those are my two views, but if you guys want to talk, any questions, let's talk about them.
Thank you, Mr. Jamil Yusuf. And because we'll be having another session at 2:30, so for this, if anybody has a question, comments, we can talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I think you're absolutely right in that the State Department is a vehicle of diplomacy. So logistically, what are the steps to get either the Treasury or the Department of Justice to kind of step up to the task?
So I think, the law needs to be amended, and we need to make Congress understand that they have asked, their intention is good, but, they're asking the wrong person to do this. The State Department can recognize that there's issues the way they have been, but if a case is not resolved within so many years in the reports that they put out, I think it should be an automatic response from the Treasury Department, and they should have a mandate from Congress to impose sanctions instantly until the cases are cleared. That would be my recommendation. And then, if the State Department feels that there's bigger issues, bigger fish to fry, well, I think my daughter is important, I think your child is important, your child is important, they should be able to look us in the eye and tell us, there's a bigger issue here. Maybe it's a nuclear non-proliferation agreement. This is going to benefit all of the U.S. So your issue has to take a back seat to that one. But I want to hear that. Any more questions?
Yes, so I will ask a general question that, because I'm hearing lots of congressmen hearings, and in that it has been concluded that the Goldman Act has a very appropriate language to put sanctions straight away. And is there any way we can, and now it depends on the administration, right? Is there any way we can bypass an administration and let the Congress decide on that?
So the Congress really supervises the executive branch. So they pass the laws, and if they feel that the laws are not being implemented the way they should, the Congress has oversight. So they can bring in people from the executive, the Department of State. Right now it's the Department of State, and ask them questions, why is the reporting, the same from one year to the next? How come, your reports don't seem to have new information? Are you saying that, every year it's, just copy paste? There's nothing new that you can and you must add. We're paying good money to the State Department as citizens to do a good job. So why are they copy pasting? Why have they not, started implementing some of those sanctions that we talked about, and they've stayed at the level of, what I consider to be toothless, recognitions that something is wrong. We need more. And, finally, if the Congress feels that, the response is still lacking, they can change the law.
And just a heads up that our last hearing, Department of State was not there.
They refuse to come.
Yeah,
I'm not
they didn't come
surprised.
at all.
Well, I mean, if you guys want, I know we have very limited time, but, I was shocked by the last two reports coming out of the State Department for 2019, 2018, 2019, and 20. They're basically copies. They just hit a button and it just gets reprinted. They just change the numbers and very superficial things. And to me, that's a problem, because it means the thought has not gone into the preparation.
So when they did I think it was the anniversary of the Goldman Act, and Chris Smith had spoke, he even told the State Department, because they were saying that the funding wasn't there, and that he even offered up, what do you need?
Yeah.
What is it that we can do for you to make you be able to handle
Yeah.
the situation?
Yeah.
And they didn't take it. It was like they didn't need it. He's offering it. He's saying, what kind of solutions do you need for Congress to help? And there was none.
I mean, that's to me, that's another problem, because it's almost an admission that no amount of money from Congress is going to change the manner in which the State Department treats the issue. And I'm not putting them down. I think they're good people. They're doing good things, and many of them, feel for us very much. They have a great deal of empathy. But, systematic, as a system, if something keeps happening, I think, we need to ask the question, why? And so, there's a systemic problem. And I think the problem, I'm putting my finger on it when I say the State Department's job is to do diplomacy. And so it's very difficult to ask them to become enforcers and to take on a very different role. So maybe we need to split that portion and give it to a part of the government that does that, and that's happy to do that.
Right. But isn't that part of the State Department for children's issues?
It is their job to recognize and to advocate and to do diplomacy for that particular issue, but the results are here. The results are we're not getting our kids back. I've been waiting 4 years. Yesterday I was talking to a gentleman who told me 7 years and no end in sight. Another one was saying 3 or 5 years, I think. So, at some point, we have to ask the hard questions, and that's all I'm trying to do.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I want to thank you so much for, I was in another session, but I could hear some of it as I dipped in, so, pardon me. I just want to thank you so much
Thank you.
for, one, just being a parent and using your pain to bring about change and to do it in an effective way. And I certainly, we at iStand will support you, continue to support you, both as a parent, but even with your efforts to bring attention to the Goldman Act and what it is and what it's not doing, and how we also have to take the lead on this ourselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Noel.
Thank you.